In gaming, ultra settings are all the buzz. Everyone is always concerned with what settings they're playing at and whether or not they will be able to achieve the highest graphical fidelity in a game. But do ultra settings really give you the best visuals without tanking your frame rates? Recently, I learned that most games actually optimize their games for high settings instead of ultra, which I found interesting. So I'm here to ask the question, do ultra settings really matter? So, in preparation for today's video, I've prepared a set of benchmarks, and the games that have been benchmarked are Rise of the Tomb Raider and Dishonored 2. I tested all two games in 1440p, but I tested them in their ultra quality and in their high quality, so you guys can take a look at the differences between the two graphical settings. So, jumping right into it, starting off with Rise of the Tomb Raider. In Rise of the Tomb Raider, I should note that for ultra settings, I'm actually not using the highest preset that Rise of the Tomb Raider offers, but instead I just maxed out the settings. It should also be noted that I'm using a GTX 1080 for all of the tests that I'm going to show you. But anyways, looking at the benchmark and comparing the two, in high settings we're almost constantly getting 20 to 30 frames per second higher when being compared to ultra settings. In the ultra settings benchmark, I actually dropped down below 60 frames per second quite consistently, and there was actually a huge stutter when the benchmark switched to Syria, and the frame rate actually tanked all the way down to 7 frames per second. And at the end here, we see that using the high preset, we were able to achieve an average of 98 frames per second throughout the benchmark in comparison to when we maxed the graphic settings out, where we achieved an average of 68 frames per second, which is 30 frames per second worse than when using high settings. Now, to actually talk about the graphics, I think the two most notable differences between high and ultra settings are things like Lara's hair and the level of detail. And if you're pixel peeping, you might notice it, but Rise of the Tomb Raider is normally a pretty fast-paced game, so is it really worth it to sacrifice so many frames for slightly improved visuals? In my opinion, which is probably shared by a lot of you, it really isn't. Up next, we have Dishonored 2, a little bit more of a recent game, and in this game we're comparing the high preset to the ultra preset at 1440p with a GTX 1080, as I mentioned previously. Now, in this game, the difference between the frame rates of high and ultra aren't as shocking as it was in the Rise of the Tomb Raider, but it's still there. Using the high preset, we're managing a consistent 10 frames higher than when we're using the ultra preset, and once again, in the ultra preset, we saw several dips down below 60. But in the high preset, although the frame rate did dip a couple times, it wasn't as frequent as when we were using the ultra preset. And honestly, when playing at these two different graphical settings, it was really hard to spot the differences if there were any at all. I think the shadows were a bit more clean on the ultra preset and the lighting was a bit more noticeable, but other than that, I really couldn't see the difference between high and ultra. So now that we've gone through both benchmarks, we need to answer the question I posed originally, and that is, do ultra settings matter? Or in other words, should you be playing in ultra settings? And honestly, the answer for most of you is probably no. Sure, if your PC can handle it or if you want visuals over frames, then you should be playing in ultra settings, but for most of you, neither of those are true. And to you, I say you should probably be aiming to play in high settings instead of ultra settings. Sure, ultra can sometimes look nicer, but most of the time, it's little things that we won't notice, and I'm sure most of you would prefer higher frame rates over slightly improved visuals, if there are any improvements at all. And that's about it for today's video. If you liked this video, go ahead and leave a like. If you didn't, go ahead and leave a dislike. If you want to see more videos like this in the future, then go ahead and subscribe and turn on post notifications. Please leave a comment down below telling me what I should make a video on next. And that's all for me, but like always, I will see you guys all next time. Bye guys.